The dust from the stagecoach still hung in the air when Amelia Vincent stepped down onto the wooden planks of Challis, Idaho, her heart as heavy as the trunk being unloaded behind her. She had promised herself she would never trust another man's words again, not after 3 years of believing Richard's lies about leaving his wife, not after the humiliation of discovering he had 2 other mistresses receiving the same promises in neighboring towns. It was August 1882, and at 24 years old, she felt ancient, used up, and hollowed out like the abandoned mine shafts dotting the mountains around this rough mining town. The main street of Challis stretched before her, a collection of weathered buildings that leaned slightly as if exhausted from holding themselves upright against the harsh Idaho winters. The Salmon River ran cold and clear just beyond the town's edge, and the mountains rose up like protective walls on all sides. Amelia had chosen this remote place specifically because it was as far from St. Louis as her savings could take her, a place where no one knew her shame or her foolishness. "Miss Vincent?" A woman's voice cut through her dark thoughts. Amelia turned to find a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. "I'm Martha Higgins. You wrote to me about the teaching position." Amelia managed a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Higgins. Thank you for meeting me. Call me Martha, dear. Everyone does. Come along, I will show you to your room above the schoolhouse. It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak anymore since my husband repaired it last spring." Martha took one handle of Amelia's trunk, and together they began walking down the dusty street. "We are desperate for a proper teacher. The last one married a rancher and moved out to the Lemhi Valley. Can you imagine? 6 months of schooling and she up and left us." Amelia said nothing. She could imagine it perfectly. Another woman believing in promises, in pretty words whispered under starlight. She wondered how long it would take before that rancher's wife discovered the truth behind whatever fairy tale he had sold her. They passed the saloon, and Amelia kept her eyes forward, ignoring the curious stares of men lounging on the porch. She had learned to make herself invisible to men's attention, to wrap herself in a cloak of respectability so thick that no one would guess at the scarlet shame she carried. The schoolhouse sat at the far end of town, a simple structure with a small bell tower. Martha led her around back to an external staircase that climbed to a door on the 2nd floor. The room inside was indeed small, just enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove. A single window looked out over the mountains, and despite everything, Amelia felt something ease slightly in her chest at the sight of all that open space. "You start Monday," Martha said, setting down the trunk. "We have 19 children, ages 6 to 15. Most cannot read beyond a primer, and their arithmetic is worse. Their parents are miners mostly, or farmers trying to coax crops from this stubborn soil. They work hard, and they expect their children to learn something useful." "I will do my best," Amelia said quietly. Martha studied her for a long moment, and Amelia had the uncomfortable feeling that this woman saw far too much. "You have got that look," Martha finally said. "The look of someone running from something. I will not pry, but I will say this. Challis is not St. Louis or San Francisco or wherever you have come from. Out here, people do not much care about your past if you do honest work in the present. You teach my children well, and you will be left in peace." After Martha left, Amelia sank onto the bed and allowed herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. She had been traveling for 2 weeks, first by train and then by stage coach over roads that seemed designed to rattle a person's bones loose. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the weariness in her soul. Richard had been a banker, successful and charming, with silver in his hair and honey in his words. For 3 years he had told her they would marry as soon as his divorce was finalized. For 3 years she had waited in the small house he rented for her, receiving him whenever he could slip away from his wife and his business. She had believed him because she had wanted so desperately to believe that someone could love her, that she was not destined to become a spinster schoolteacher after all. The truth had come out in the cruelest way possible. His wife had appeared at Amelia's door one afternoon with 2 other women in tow. There was no divorce. There had never been a divorce. Richard had a wife who knew all about his mistresses, who tolerated them as long as they stayed quiet and caused no scandal. The other 2 women had been just as shocked as Amelia, just as devastated to learn they were not special, not loved, just convenient. Amelia had packed that very night. She had sold everything she could not carry, withdrawn her small savings, and bought a ticket as far west as the money would take her. Challis, Idaho, population 312, had been the end of the line. She unpacked slowly, hanging her 2 good dresses on pegs, arranging her books on the small shelf above the table. She had volumes of Shakespeare, Dickens, and Austen, a geography text, an arithmetic primer, and her mother's Bible. Everything she owned fit in this tiny room, and somehow that felt appropriate. She was starting over with nothing, building a new life from scratch. That night she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town. Dogs barking, a piano jangling from the saloon, men's voices raised in laughter or argument. The wind moved through the mountains with a lonely sound that matched the emptiness inside her. She had made a promise to herself on that long journey west. No more lies, no more trusting in pretty words. She would build a life alone, and she would never again give a man the power to break her heart. Monday morning came too quickly. Amelia dressed in her plainest dress, a dove gray cotton that buttoned to her throat and pinned her dark hair severely back. She examined herself in the small mirror above the washstand. At 24, she still had smooth skin and clear green eyes, but she had learned to arrange her features into an expression of cool reserve that discouraged familiarity. Satisfied that she looked every inch the respectable schoolmarm, she descended the stairs to the schoolhouse below. The children arrived in clusters, some walking from town, others brought by parents on horseback or in wagons from the surrounding farms. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds missing front teeth to lanky 15-year-old boys who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. Amelia stood at the front of the single room and felt the weight of 19 pairs of eyes assessing her. "Good morning," she said, pitching her voice to Carrie without shouting. "My name is Miss Vincent and I am your new teacher. I expect 3 things from each of you. First, you will arrive on time. Second, you will do your work to the best of your ability. Third, you will treat each other and me with respect. In return, I promise to teach you everything I know and to treat you fairly. Does anyone have questions?" A small girl with braids raised her hand. "Can you really read whole books?" "I can," Amelia said. "And by the end of this year, so will you." The morning passed in a blur of assessment. She tested each child's reading and arithmetic, making notes about their levels. Some could barely write their own names, while others surprised her with their hunger to learn. One boy, Tommy Briggs, devoured the geography book she gave him, asking question after question about places he had only dreamed of. At noon, the children scattered for lunch, most eating quickly before running off to play in the field behind the schoolhouse. Amelia sat at her desk with an apple and a piece of cheese, reviewing her notes. She was so absorbed that she did not hear the door open until a deep voice said, "Excuse me, Miss Vincent." She looked up and felt her breath catch. The man standing in the doorway was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously, and his dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. He wore worn denims and a faded blue shirt, dusty boots that had seen hard miles. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of competence and hard work. "Yes," Amelia said, making her voice cool and professional despite the unexpected flutter in her chest. "Name is Blake Sutton," he said. "I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town. I heard we had a new teacher and I wanted to come introduce myself. My nephew lives with me, and he will be starting school next week. I apologize for the delay, but we were moving cattle and I could not spare him until now." "How old is your nephew?" Amelia asked, focusing on the practical details rather than the way Blake Sutton's hands looked capable and strong. 12. His name is Daniel. He is a good boy, but he has not had much schooling. His parents died of fever 2 years back, and he came to live with me. I have taught him what I can, but I am better with horses than books." Blake's voice carried a note of apology, as if his own limitations somehow failed the boy. "I will assess him when he arrives and place him accordingly," Amelia said. "Many of the children here have gaps in their education. We will catch him up." Blake nodded, but he did not leave. He seemed to be searching for words, and Amelia waited with growing discomfort. Finally, he said, "I also wanted to say if you need anything, firewood or repairs or such, you just send word. The schoolhouse is important to this community, and we all want to make sure you are comfortable here." "That is kind of you," Amelia said, though her tone suggested the conversation was over. Blake settled his hat back on his head. "Well, I will let you get back to your lunch. Welcome to Challis, Miss Vincent." After he left, Amelia found she had lost her appetite. She was angry with herself for noticing Blake Sutton's eyes, for feeling anything at all when he spoke. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. No more men. No more lies. Just her work, her students, and the quiet life she was building. But that night, as she prepared her lessons for the next day, she found her thoughts drifting back to the rancher with the kind eyes and work-worn hands. She sternly redirected her focus to the arithmetic problems she was writing out, reminding herself that kind eyes meant nothing. Richard had had kind eyes too, right up until the moment his wife appeared at her door. The first weeks of school fell into a rhythm. Amelia taught reading and arithmetic, history and geography, drilling the basics into her students with a patience she had not known she possessed. She discovered that she loved teaching, loved the moment when a child's face lit up with understanding, loved watching them grow more confident as they mastered new skills. Blake Sutton brought his nephew Daniel the following Monday, and Amelia found the boy to be bright and eager despite his limited education. He was tall for 12, with his uncle's blue eyes and a quiet demeanor. Blake stayed only long enough to see Daniel settled, tipping his hat to Amelia before leaving. She told herself she was relieved, but Blake kept appearing. He brought firewood for the schoolhouse stove, stacking it neatly behind the building without being asked. When a windstorm damaged the bell tower, he arrived with tools and lumber to make repairs. He never lingered, never said more than a polite greeting, but his presence began to unsettle Amelia in ways she could not quite name. Martha noticed, of course. One afternoon in late September, she arrived at the schoolhouse with fresh bread and sat down uninvited at Amelia's desk after the children had left. "Blake Sutton is a good man," Martha said without preamble. "I am sure he is," Amelia said carefully. "His wife died in childbirth 7 years ago. The baby died too. He has not looked at another woman since, not with any real interest, but he looks at you. Mrs. Higgins, Martha. And I am not matchmaking, girl. I am just telling you facts. Blake Sutton is honest as the day is long. If he says something, you can take it to the bank. He does not lie, and he does not make promises he cannot keep. There are not many men you can say that about. Amelia set down her pen. With all due respect, Martha, I am not interested in any man's character, good or bad. I came here to teach, not to find a husband. Martha studied her with those two knowing eyes. Someone hurt you badly. It was not a question, but Amelia answered anyway. Someone lied to me for 3 years. I was foolish enough to believe him. I will not be foolish again. That is a lonely way to live. It is a safe way to live, Amelia countered. Martha sighed and stood, gathering her shawl. Safe is not the same as happy, child, but you will figure that out in your own time, I suppose. After she left, Amelia sat in the empty schoolhouse and stared at the chalkboard covered in the day's lessons. Safe was enough. It had to be enough. She had been happy once, or thought she was, and look where that had led. October brought the first real cold, frost glittering on the ground in the mornings, and the mountains dusted with snow. Amelia bought a warmer coat from the general store and learned to bank the fire in her little stove so it would last through the night. The children arrived with red cheeks and runny noses, and she kept the schoolhouse warm and dry, a sanctuary against the gathering winter. Blake still came by regularly, always with some practical reason. He brought venison when he butchered a deer, saying he had too much for just him and Daniel. He fixed a loose board on the schoolhouse steps, replaced a cracked window pane, adjusted the damper on the stove so it would draw better. Each time, Amelia thanked him politely and kept her distance, though she found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps on the porch. One Friday in mid-October, a storm rolled in unexpectedly, turning the afternoon dark and sending sheets of rain against the schoolhouse windows. Amelia dismissed the children early, watching anxiously as parents arrived to collect them. Daniel Sutton waited patiently by the door, and Amelia kept him inside out of the rain. "Your uncle will be here soon," she assured him. "He always comes," Daniel said with simple confidence. "Uncle Blake never breaks a promise." The words struck Amelia with unexpected force. She turned away so the boy would not see her face, busying herself with straightening books on the shelf. Never breaks a promise. As if such a man existed, when Blake arrived 20 minutes later, soaked through and apologetic, Amelia found herself studying him with new eyes. He did not offer excuses, just wrapped Daniel in his own coat and prepared to head back out into the storm. "Wait," Amelia heard herself say. "The storm is getting worse. Perhaps you should wait a bit, let it pass." Blake looked surprised but nodded. "That is probably wise. The road will be muddy anyway." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, Daniel between them, water dripping from Blake's hat brim to puddle on the floor. Finally, Amelia said, "I have coffee on the stove upstairs. You could dry off a bit." She could not quite believe the words had come from her mouth, and from Blake's expression, he was equally surprised. But he followed her up the external stairs to her small room, Daniel trailing behind. She poured coffee into tin cups while Blake stood near the stove, steam rising from his wet clothes. "This is kind of you," Blake said. "I know you value your privacy." "It is just practical," Amelia said, though they both knew that was not quite true. "No sense in you catching your death." Daniel wandered to the window to watch the storm, and Blake sipped his coffee, his eyes on Amelia. "Daniel tells me he is learning to read full sentences now. He is real proud of that. He is a good student, quick to learn. He talks about you a lot, says you are the smartest person he ever met." Blake smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. "I am inclined to agree." Amelia felt heat rise in her cheeks and hated herself for it. "I am just doing my job. You do more than that. You care about those kids, they can tell. Blake set down his cup. Miss Vincent, I wonder if I might ask you something. Amelia's guard went up immediately. Here it came, whatever request or expectation men always had. What is it? Would you consider giving Daniel extra lessons in the evening sometimes? I would pay you, of course. He is trying so hard to catch up to the other kids his age, and I think with a bit more help, he could do it. But I understand if you do not have time. It was so far from what Amelia had expected that she was momentarily speechless. Not a proposition, not some veiled suggestion, just a simple request from a man who clearly loved his nephew. I do not need payment, she said finally. I could work with him 2 evenings a week if that would help. Blake's face lit up. That would be wonderful. Thank you, Miss Vincent, truly. The storm passed, and Blake and Daniel rode home through the mud. Amelia stood at her window and watched them go, the man's hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. Something in her chest ached in a way she did not want to examine too closely. The tutoring sessions began the following week. Daniel arrived every Tuesday and Thursday evening, and Amelia worked with him on reading and arithmetic at the small table in her room. He was an attentive student, hungry for knowledge in a way that reminded her why she had wanted to teach in the first place. Blake always came to collect him, arriving exactly when he said he would. Often he would wait on the steps outside rather than intrude, but as the evenings grew colder, Amelia began inviting him in. He would sit quietly while she finished the lesson, sometimes asking questions about what Daniel was learning, clearly interested in his nephew's progress. One evening in early November, after Daniel had run downstairs ahead of them, Blake lingered at the door. Miss Vincent, I want to thank you properly. What you are doing for Daniel, it means more than I can say. His mother was my sister, and when she died, I promised her I would give him a good life. Education is part of that. You are keeping your promise, Amelia said softly. I try. Blake's eyes held hers. A promise is a sacred thing the way I see it. Once you give your word, you are bound by it. My father taught me that. Amelia felt something crack inside her, some carefully constructed wall beginning to crumble. Not everyone sees it that way. No, Blake agreed. But some of us do. After he left, Amelia sat at her table and stared at the books they had been using. She realized with a start that she looked forward to these evenings, to Daniel's progress and Blake's quiet presence. She was letting them in, letting herself care, and that terrified her. But she did not stop the lessons. November turned the world silver and white. Snow fell in earnest, transforming Challis into a landscape from a Christmas card. Amelia bought warmer clothes and learned to navigate the icy streets. The schoolhouse was cozy with the stove burning, and she taught her students between the dancing shadows cast by lamplight. Thanksgiving came, and Martha insisted Amelia join her family for dinner. Amelia found herself seated at a crowded table with Martha's husband and 3 grown children and their families. It was loud and chaotic and warm, and Amelia realized with a pang how lonely she had been. Blake and Daniel were there too, apparently longtime friends of the family. Amelia found herself seated next to Blake, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her. He served her turkey and passed her potatoes, attentive without being overbearing. Daniel chatted excitedly about a book he was reading, and Blake's eyes crinkled with pride. After dinner, the women gathered in the kitchen to wash dishes while the men took coffee in the parlor. Martha nudged Amelia with her elbow. You and Blake seem comfortable together. We have gotten to know each other through Daniel's lessons, Amelia said carefully. He is courting you, you know. Slowly, because he knows you are skittish, but he is courting you all the same. Amelia's hand stilled in the dishwater. He has never said anything. Blake Sutton is not a man for fancy words. He shows what he means through actions. All that firewood, those repairs, asking you to tutor Daniel, giving him an excuse to see you regular. He is courting you the way a good man does, trying to prove himself worthy before he speaks. Amelia's heart was beating too fast. I do not want to be courted. Martha's voice gentled. Do you not, or are you just afraid? That night, lying in her narrow bed, Amelia forced herself to face the truth. She was afraid, terrified, because somewhere in the last 2 months she had started to care for Blake Sutton. She looked forward to seeing him, felt safe in his presence, found herself thinking about him at odd moments. And that caring felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling into the same abyss that had swallowed her in St. Louis. But Blake was not Richard. He did not make grand promises or shower her with pretty words. He simply showed up, steady and reliable, doing what he said he would do. He treated her with respect, never pushing, never demanding more than she offered. And the way he loved Daniel, the patient devotion he showed that boy, spoke to a depth of character that Richard had never possessed. Still, Amelia could not quite bring herself to trust it. Trust had betrayed her before. December arrived with a blizzard that shut down the town for 3 days. Amelia stayed in her room, reading by the stove and venturing out only to check on the schoolhouse below. On the 3rd day, when the storm finally broke, she heard someone clearing the snow from her external staircase. She looked out to find Blake shoveling, his breath frosting in the cold air. She opened the door. You did not have to come all the way into town for that. Blake looked up, snow dusting his shoulders. Wanted to make sure you were all right. Roads are bad, so Daniel will not make it in for his lesson tonight, but I thought I should check on you. I am fine. But even as she said it, Amelia realized she was touched by his concern. Would you like some coffee? You must be frozen. Blake came inside, stomping snow from his boots. Amelia poured coffee and they sat at her small table, the comfortable silence of people who had grown used to each other's company. Finally, Blake said, Can I ask you something personal, Miss Vincent? Amelia tensed. What is it? Why did you come to Challis? A woman with your education could teach anywhere, somewhere with more society and comfort. Why here? She could have deflected, could have given a vague answer about wanting a change. Instead, she found herself telling him the truth. I was running away. From my past, from a mistake I made, from promises that turned out to be lies. Blake listened without interrupting as the whole sorry story poured out. Richard and his false promises, the 3 years she wasted, the humiliation of learning the truth. She told him about the shame and anger, about feeling used and foolish. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face. I promised myself I would never be that stupid again, she said, wiping her eyes. I would never trust another man's words. Blake was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, That man was a coward and a liar. What he did to you was wrong. But Amelia, not all men are like him. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. How can I know that? How can anyone know? You watch what a man does, not just what he says. Does he keep the small promises as well as the big ones? Does he show up when he says he will? Does he treat others with kindness, even when there is nothing in it for him? Blake leaned forward, his eyes intense. I cannot speak for all men, Amelia, but I can speak for myself. I have never lied to you. Every time I said I would do something, I did it. That is not because I want anything from you. It is because that is who I am. I know, Amelia whispered. That is what scares me. Blake reached across the table and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused from ranch work, warm and solid. I am going to make you a promise now. Just one. You do not have to do anything with it, and it does not require anything from you, but I want you to hear it. Amelia's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "What promise?" "I promise that I will never lie to you. Not now, not ever. I will never make you a promise I cannot keep. If I say something to you, it will be true. And if I cannot promise something, I will tell you that too. You can trust my word, Amelia, because I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you if that is what it takes." Tears spilled over again, but this time they were different. "Why? Why would you promise that?" Blake's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Because somewhere between fixing your roof and watching you teach my nephew, I fell in love with you. And I know you are not ready to hear that, might never be ready. But I wanted you to know that my word is something you can count on, whether you love me back or not." Amelia pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. Her mind was racing, panic and hope warring inside her. "Blake, I cannot. I know." He stood too, reaching for his coat. "I am not asking you for anything, Amelia. I am just telling you the truth. That is all. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here. That is another promise." He left, and Amelia sank into her chair, trembling. The man had just told her he loved her and asked for nothing in return. He had made her one promise and asked her to trust it. Everything in her screamed to protect herself, to lock her heart away where it could not be broken again. But a small voice, one she had been trying to ignore for weeks, whispered that maybe, just maybe, Blake Sutton was different. Christmas came to Challis with a community celebration in the schoolhouse. Amelia's students performed recitations and songs, and the whole town crowded in to watch. Blake was there with Daniel, standing at the back, his eyes finding Amelia's across the room. She looked away, but she could feel his gaze like a physical touch. After the program, people lingered with cider and cookies. Several families thanked Amelia for her work with their children, and she felt the warmth of acceptance. Martha appeared at her elbow with a small wrapped package. "For you," Martha said, "from all of us." Inside was a beautiful shawl hand-knitted in soft blue wool. Amelia's throat tightened. "This is too much." "It is just enough," Martha said firmly. "You are part of this community now, Amelia. We take care of our own." That night, wrapped in the new shawl, Amelia realized that somewhere along the way, Challis had stopped feeling like a place of exile and started feeling like home. She had built a life here, made connections, found purpose. And at the center of it all was Blake Sutton, steady as the mountains, keeping his promises. The new year of 1883 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. School was sometimes canceled when the weather was too severe, and Amelia spent those days in her room, reading and thinking. Daniel's tutoring sessions continued when weather permitted, and Blake always came to fetch him, their conversations growing longer, more personal. One evening in late January, after Daniel had gone downstairs, Blake stayed behind. "Amelia, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. All right?" "Do you believe that I keep my promises?" she considered carefully. In the 5 months she had known Blake, he had never once failed to do what he said he would. He showed up when expected, did the work he promised, treated her with unfailing respect and kindness. "Yes," she said finally, "I believe you do." "And do you believe I was telling the truth when I said I love you?" Amelia's breath caught. She met his eyes, those clear blue eyes that had never looked at her with anything but honesty. "Yes." Blake nodded slowly. "That is enough for now. I just needed you to know those things, to really believe them." He pulled on his coat. "I will see you Thursday." After he left, Amelia sat in the gathering dark and felt something shift inside her. She did believe him. Against all her instincts, against every wall she had built, she believed Blake Sutton's word. And if she believed that, what else might be possible? February brought a thaw, the snow melting into mud and the river running high. Amelia walked to school through the slush, her spirits oddly light. Spring felt possible, even in the lingering cold. Something was changing in her, some ice around her heart beginning to crack. On Valentine's Day, she found a small package on her desk. Inside was a book, a beautiful leather-bound volume of poetry. The inscription read simply, "For Amelia, Blake." No romantic declarations, no pressure, just a gift that showed he knew her tastes, that he paid attention. That evening she sought him out. She walked the 5 miles to his ranch in the fading light, her heart pounding with each step. The ranch house was modest but well kept, with a barn and corrals, mountains rising behind it. Blake came out when he heard her approach, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Amelia, is everything all right?" She held up the book. "Thank you for this. It is beautiful. You walked all the way out here to thank me." Blake's brow furrowed. "You should not be walking alone. I will ride you back to town." "I did not walk here to thank you for the book." Amelia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I walked here to tell you that I believe you, I believe your promise, and I think maybe I am ready to stop being afraid." Blake went very still. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have been watching you for months, and you are everything you claim to be. You keep your word. You are kind and honest and good. And her voice cracked. "I think I am falling in love with you, and that terrifies me, but I do not want to run from it anymore." In 2 strides, Blake closed the distance between them. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Amelia Vincent, I promise you that I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that your trust is not misplaced. I will never lie to you. I will never break a promise to you. I will love you until my last breath and beyond if there is an afterlife." "That is more than one promise," Amelia said, laughing through sudden tears. "Then I will keep all of them," Blake said and kissed her. It was nothing like Richard's practiced kisses. It was honest and sweet and full of a restrained passion that made Amelia's knees weak. She kissed him back, pouring 5 months of longing and hope into it, feeling the last of her walls crumble. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. I want to do this right." "I would like that," Amelia whispered. Blake saddled a horse and rode her back to town, his arm secure around her waist as she sat sideways in front of him. The stars were brilliant overhead, and Challis glowed with lamplight in the valley below. Amelia leaned back against Blake's solid chest and felt something she had not felt in years. Safe. Truly safe. The courtship was everything a courtship should be. Blake came to town every Sunday to take Amelia for walks along the river. He brought her wildflowers when they began blooming in March. He attended every school event, proud as any parent when Daniel excelled. He introduced Amelia to his friends, integrated her into his life with a quiet confidence that assumed she belonged there, and he kept every single promise, down to the smallest detail. If he said he would meet her at 3 o'clock, he was there at 3 o'clock. If he promised to repair something, it was repaired. His word became something Amelia could lean on, solid as bedrock. For her part, Amelia found herself opening like one of the spring flowers Blake brought her. She laughed more, smiled more, allowed herself to hope. She met Blake's ranch hands and learned about his operation. She and Daniel grew even closer, the boy thrilled that his beloved teacher and uncle were courting. She let herself be loved and discovered that Blake's love was nothing like Richard's had been. It was steady and patient, demanding nothing but freely given. In April, Blake asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the river, the water rushing past, new leaves unfurling on the cottonwood trees. He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket and took her hand. "Amelia, I promised you I would never lie, and I have not. I promised to prove myself worthy of your trust, and I hope I have. Now I want to make you one more promise. If you will marry me, I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful and true. I promise to build a life with you where you are valued and cherished. I promise that our home will be a place of honesty and safety. Will you take that promise? Will you marry me?" Amelia looked at this good man, this honest man, and felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring. "Yes. I will marry you, Blake Sutton, and I promise to love you just as fiercely in return." They were married in June, in the little church in Challis with the whole town in attendance. Amelia wore a dress of cream silk that Martha had helped her sew, and Blake wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed. Daniel stood up as best man, beaming with pride. Martha cried, and even some of the rough miners dabbed at their eyes. When the minister asked if they would honor and cherish each other, Blake's "I will" rang out clear and strong. Amelia's voice shook slightly with emotion, but her "I will" was just as certain. They exchanged the rings and sealed their promises with a kiss that drew cheers from the congregation. The reception was held at Martha's house, with food and dancing and laughter. Blake danced with his new wife in the fading light, holding her close, and Amelia felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked softly. "That I am the luckiest woman alive. That you kept your promise." "I will keep all of them," Blake said. "Every single one. That is my promise to you." And he did. Amelia moved to the ranch, transforming the modest house into a real home. She continued teaching, Blake driving her into town each morning and collecting her each afternoon. The routine suited them both, and Daniel thrived under their combined care. Their first year of marriage was marked by small joys and deep contentment. Blake proved to be a husband who listened to her thoughts, valued her opinions, shared both the work and the decisions of their life together. He never dismissed her concerns or made promises lightly. When he said he would do something, he did it. When he could not promise something, he said so honestly. Amelia learned to trust not just his word, but her own judgment. She had been right about him. He was different, and that realization healed something in her that Richard had broken. In the spring of 1884, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. Blake received the news with joy tempered by worry, remembering his first wife's death. But Amelia was healthy and strong, and the local doctor was competent. Blake made her promise to tell him immediately if anything felt wrong, and she did, touched by his concern. Their son was born in December, howling and healthy, with Blake's blue eyes and Amelia's dark hair. They named him Thomas, and Blake held his son with a tenderness that made Amelia fall in love with him all over again. "I promise to be the best father I can be," Blake whispered to the tiny baby. "I promise to teach you to be honest and kind. I promise to love you all your life." Amelia watched through happy tears. More promises, and she knew he would keep every one. Thomas was followed by a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Sarah after Blake's mother. Then another son, James, 2 years after that. The house rang with children's laughter, and Amelia juggled teaching and motherhood with Blake's unfailing support. He was patient with the children, firm but kind, teaching them by example what it meant to be people of integrity. Daniel grew to manhood on the ranch, eventually taking over much of the operation as Blake grew older. He married a nice girl from town and built a house on the southern section of the property. He never forgot what Blake and Amelia had done for him, and he patterned his own marriage after theirs, valuing honesty and kept promises. The years flowed past like the Salmon River, constant and sure. There were hard times, certainly. Harsh winters and dry summers, cattle losses and crop failures, illnesses and injuries. But through it all, Blake kept his promises. He never lied, not even about small things. He remained faithful and true. He built a life where Amelia felt valued and cherished every single day. On their 20th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were grown or nearly so. Thomas was learning the ranch business. Sarah was teaching at the school where Amelia had once taught, and James was away at college in Boise. The house was quieter now, but no less full of love. "Do you remember when we met?" Blake asked, taking her hand. His hair was silver now, his face lined by years of weather and work, but his eyes were the same clear blue. "You came to the schoolhouse to tell me about Daniel," Amelia said. "I was determined not to like you," Blake chuckled. "You did a good job of it for a while. I was terrified you would never let me close. I was terrified you would break my heart like Richard did." Amelia turned to face him fully. "But you never did. Blake, in 20 years of marriage, you have kept every single promise you ever made to me. Do you know what a gift that has been?" "You made it easy," Blake said. "Loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. Keeping my promises to you has never felt like work. It has felt like breathing, something I do naturally because the alternative is unthinkable." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "When I came to Challis, I thought my life was over. I thought I would live alone, never trusting anyone again. And then you appeared, with your quiet integrity and your steady love, and you showed me that not all promises are lies. And you showed me that love can heal even the deepest wounds," Blake said. "We have been good for each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to indigo. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm. In the corrals, the horses settled for the night. The mountains stood eternal watch. Everything was as it should be. Years later, when they were old and gray, Blake fell ill. The doctor said his heart was giving out, worn down by decades of hard work and hard living. Amelia nursed him with fierce devotion, but they both knew the end was near. On a clear autumn morning, Blake called his family to his bedside. Amelia sat beside him, holding his hand. Their children and grandchildren gathered close, and even Daniel came with his own grown family. "I want you all to know," Blake said, his voice weak but clear, "that I have lived a good life. I have been blessed beyond measure, and the reason for that is simple. I learned early that a man's word is his bond. I made promises and I kept them. I loved your mother truly and faithfully. I raised you children to value honesty and integrity. That is my legacy to you. Keep your promises, all of you. Let your word mean something." He turned to Amelia, his eyes still that brilliant blue even in his failing face. "Amelia, my love, do you remember the first promise I made you? You promised you would never lie to me," Amelia said through tears. "You promised to keep your word. And I did I not? For 43 years I kept that promise." "You did," Amelia whispered. "You kept every single one." Blake smiled. "Then I can go peacefully. I have kept faith with you, and that is all I ever wanted." His eyes closed and his breathing slowed. "I love you, Amelia, forever." "Forever," Amelia echoed. Blake Sutton died that afternoon, surrounded by the family he loved, having kept every promise he ever made. The entire town of Challis came to his funeral, testifying to a life lived with integrity and honor. They lowered him into the ground in the cemetery on the hill, the mountains standing watch as they had for so many years. Amelia lived for 5 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, teaching occasional lessons at the school, tending her garden. She never remarried. People asked her once if she ever felt lonely. "How can I be lonely?" she said. "I had a love that most people never find. Blake gave me 43 years of kept promises. That is more than enough to last a lifetime." On a spring morning in 1927, Amelia Vincent Sutton passed away peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her aged face. They buried her next to Blake on that hill overlooking Challis, their headstones side by side. The inscription on Blake's read, "A man of his word." The inscription on Amelia's read, "Beloved wife, cherished always." Their children and grandchildren continued to live by the principles Blake and Amelia had taught them. The value of kept promises, the importance of honesty, the power of steady, faithful love. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. Each new generation hearing the story of how Blake Sutton had won Amelia Vincent's heart by making one simple promise and keeping it forever. In the town of Challis, they became something of a legend. Old-timers would tell young couples the story of the schoolteacher whose heart had been broken by promises and lies, and the cowboy who restored her faith by being a man of absolute integrity. It became a reminder that real love is not built on pretty words and grand gestures, but on the solid foundation of kept promises and steady devotion. The schoolhouse where Amelia taught still stands, though it is now a museum. Visitors can see her desk, her books, the small room upstairs where she first came to hide from her pain. They can walk down to the river where Blake proposed, see the church where they married, visit the cemetery where they rest together. And they can learn the lesson that Amelia and Blake's lives taught so clearly, that a promise kept is worth more than all the empty words in the world, and that true love is proven not in what we say, but in what we do, day after day, year after year, for a lifetime and beyond. The mountains around Challis still stand, timeless and eternal, watching over the valley where a broken-hearted woman once found healing and hope in the arms of a man whose word was his bond. The Salmon River still runs cold and clear, carrying with it the stories of those who lived and loved on its banks. And somewhere in the wind that moves through the pines and aspens, you can almost hear the echo of Blake's voice making his promise one more time. "I will never lie to you. Not now, not ever. You can trust my word because I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." And he did. By God, he did. That is the end of their story, but also its beginning. Because every time someone hears about Blake and Amelia, every time someone chooses to keep a promise even when it is hard, every time someone builds a life on honesty and integrity rather than pretty lies, their story lives again. They left behind more than children and grandchildren. They left behind a legacy of what love can be when it is built on truth, what marriage can become when founded on kept promises, what healing is possible when one person chooses to be steadfast and true. Amelia Vincent came to Challis broken and afraid, determined never to trust again. Blake Sutton made her one promise and spent 43 years keeping it. In doing so, he did not just win her heart, he healed it. He showed her that not all men are liars, that not all promises are hollow, that love can be both tender and enduring, both passionate and steady. He proved that a good man's word is worth everything, and that the greatest romance is not found in flowery speeches, but in the daily choice to honor and cherish, to remain faithful and true, to keep showing up and doing what you said you would do. Their story is a testament to the power of integrity, the beauty of faithfulness, and the transformative nature of love that is based on truth. It reminds us that we can heal from even the deepest betrayals, that we can learn to trust again, that we can find happiness after heartbreak. But it also reminds us that to be worthy of that trust, we must be people of our word, keeping our promises no matter how small, building our relationships on a foundation of honesty and steadfast devotion. In the end, that is what made Blake and Amelia's love story so extraordinary. It was not extraordinary because of dramatic gestures or passionate declarations. It was extraordinary because it was real and true and lasting. Because Blake understood that the greatest gift he could give Amelia was not diamonds or poetry or grand adventures. The greatest gift was his word, given freely and kept faithfully, proving day after day, year after year, that she was right to trust him, right to love him, right to believe that this time, finally, the promises were true. And so their story ends where all the best love stories end, with two souls who found each other, loved each other, and remained true to each other until death and beyond, with promises made and promises kept, with a love that transformed brokenness into wholeness, fear into faith, and loneliness into a joy that echoed through generations. Blake Sutton made one promise to Amelia Vincent on a cold December evening in 1882. He promised he would never lie to her, never break his word, never give her reason to doubt. And for 43 years, through all the joys and sorrows, triumphs and trials, he kept that promise faithfully. In keeping it, he gave her back something she thought was lost forever: the ability to trust, to hope, to love without fear. He gave her a life worth living and a love worth having. He gave her everything. And when the end came and they laid him in the ground, Amelia could say with absolute certainty that Blake Sutton had been a man of his word. He had kept his promise. He had loved her truly. He had never once given her cause to doubt. That is a rare and precious thing, worth more than all the gold in the Idaho mountains, worth more than anything the world could offer. Their children told their children, who told their children, passing down the story through the generations. And each time it was told, the lesson remained the same: keep your promises, live with integrity, love with faithfulness. Be like Blake, steady and true. Be like Amelia, brave enough to trust again. Build your lives on truth and your relationships on honor, because in the end, that is what lasts. That is what matters. That is what makes a life worth living and a love worth having. So the story of the schoolteacher and the cowboy lives on, a testament to the enduring power of kept promises and faithful love, a reminder that even hearts broken by lies can heal when given truth, and that the greatest romance of all is the quiet, steady devotion of two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every single day for the rest of their lives. That is the legacy of Blake and Amelia Sutton. That is the story of how one man's promise, faithfully kept, healed a woman's broken heart and created a love that lasted forever.